There is a dead quiet in a trading room on the 45th floor in Manhattan, where 20 currency screens are flashing red at precisely 4 minutes past midnight. Because on those screens, Qualcomm stock isn't just dipping, it is carving a vertical cliff straight down, wiping out $12 billion of market valuation in less than 60 seconds. For 30 years, Wall Street believed that mobile processing was a fortress with only one key, held permanently by a single titan in San Diego. Every high-end smartphone, every global cellular modem, and every premium tablet on Earth paid tribute to that monopoly, assuming nobody could ever bypass their patent wall. Until 12 months ago, when an unmarked shipping container rolled past customs checkpoints outside Beijing, holding a silicon wafer that no Western patent attorney had ever seen before. And that moment marks the exact hour zero of a total market collapse. To understand how a multi-decade empire unraveled so fast, we have to rewind the clock to exactly 24 months prior, when the first whispers of a total architectural ban hit the wire. The rule from Washington was absolute: no advanced lithography, no American intellectual property, no foreign foundry access, and no exceptions. On paper, it looked like a permanent cage designed to freeze an entire nation's digital evolution in place. Financial analysts predicted a slow, inevitable fade into obsolescence for domestic tech giants, assuming supply starvation would do all the work. You cut off the supply lines, you freeze the R&D cycle, you win the century. Except nobody bothered to check what was happening behind closed doors in Shenzhen, where the real blueprint was already being drawn in secret. While Wall Street was calculating guaranteed losses, the target wasn't folding. They were hitting fast forward on a clandestine countdown of their own. And that's where the timeline split in half. Rewind another 2 years back, to the moment the first classified directive was signed in a secure basement conference room in Beijing. The mandate was simple, brutal, and utterly uncompromised. Build a completely independent mobile architecture from scratch, or face total digital extinction within the decade. They didn't try to license workarounds from Western firms. They didn't look for offshore legal loopholes or gray market distributors. They locked down thousands of top-tier microelectronics engineers, flooded the state vaults with capital, and bypassed standard instruction sets entirely in order to invent a homegrown standard. When Western engineers first heard rumors of the project, they laughed it off as an impossible vanity project. Building a modern application processor on par with Snapdragon took decades of trial, error, billions in capital, and thousands of protected patents. You couldn't just rush the laws of physics over a weekend, or so they confidently assumed. Let's go back even further, to the root cause of this entire geopolitical chess match, the day the original licensing agreements were weaponized as economic leverage. For decades, the assumption was simple: if you control the core patents of mobile communication, you control the globe. Every handset manufacturer on the planet had to pay the toll at the gate, bending the knee to San Diego's pricing models and legal terms. It was an invisible tax levied on billions of human beings every single day. And for a long time, there was zero alternative. You either paid the fee or you didn't ship a phone. But when trade policy turned into a blunt instrument, that predictable tax system suddenly transformed into an existential threat for every tech manufacturer operating outside Western borders, which forced a desperate, high-stakes gamble: build a sovereign architecture or become permanently dependent on a foreign power's kill switch. And that desperation birthed the ghost chip. Let's travel deeper into the timeline, right to the middle of the engineering labs, where the impossible was being broken down into daily tasks. Imagine a room with no windows, illuminated only by the blue glow of diagnostic monitors, where teams worked in 3 rotating shifts around the clock. They weren't allowed to use standard electronic design automation software imported from the West. They had to write custom compilation tools from scratch, testing them on domestic server clusters that lagged behind industry standards by years. Every single logic gate had to be mapped manually to ensure zero trace of foreign intellectual property could ever be found during an audit. When a design failed thermal dissipation tests at 90 degrees Celsius, they didn't outsource the fix, they redesigned the microarchitecture overnight. It was industrial-scale determination, driven by pure survival instinct. And the Western markets had no idea it was happening right under their noses. Let's step back and look at the broader chessboard across international borders, where supply chains were being quietly redrawn. Ports from Singapore to Rotterdam saw a sudden, mysterious drop in standard transceiver shipments, replaced entirely by unbranded cargo manifests routed through secondary intermediaries. Logistics firms reported ghost flights carrying classified hardware payloads under diplomatic or state-backed commercial exemption statuses. Every major global smartphone brand outside the US began quietly auditing their dependency on a single supplier in California, realizing that a single policy shift could cut off their entire inventory overnight. It was a quiet, desperate scramble for survival executed in absolute secrecy. And behind those logistics shifts lay millions of man-hours of code, hardware debugging, and architectural testing that no analyst's model had predicted. Which brings us directly to the moment the first commercial units rolled off the assembly lines. Flash forward back to the present day, and that exact impossibility is sitting quietly inside millions of prototype devices currently undergoing closed-door stress tests across domestic telecom networks. This matters because the chip isn't a cheap knockoff, nor is it a lagging, power-hungry imitation of Western hardware. It is a hyper-integrated piece of silicon that combines advanced cellular modems and neural processing units on a single, ultra-dense die, running 20% cooler than current Western flagships. Which means the hardware moat that protected American semiconductor dominance for an entire generation has just been drained overnight. When a domestic giant stops buying foreign chips, the financial shockwave doesn't just hit California balance sheets. It starves the entire global ecosystem of its primary revenue engine. And the market is only now starting to realize the full scale of the trap. Remember the panic over global supply chain bottlenecks and chip shortages from a few years ago. This is infinitely worse, because it's not a temporary disruption of parts or a logistics hiccup. It's the permanent birth of a parallel technological empire that operates entirely outside Western jurisdiction. If this new chip hits full commercial scale across domestic markets over the next 12 months, the global distribution model for mobile hardware will shatter beyond repair, forcing brands to choose between two mutually exclusive digital worlds. Which brings us right back to the burning question keeping tech executives awake tonight. What happens when 1 billion consumers are locked inside a sovereign digital ecosystem that refuses to touch foreign silicon ever again? The answer isn't just about lost market share or falling stock prices in California. It is about the end of a unipolar technological world and the sudden, jarring birth of a fractured silicon age from which nobody will escape unchanged.